Look, it's really great to be back on the West Coast. I'm from Nova Scotia. I spent some time in Western Canada, but I haven't been able to travel much the last couple of years, and it's just really nice to get to see people in person. And I want to say thank you to the Punjabi Press Club for the invitation, and Suk and Randeep for arranging. This is a tremendous opportunity. Just before I get too deep, let me say thank you for the work that you do. One of the things that I've noticed since I've been appointed to be Canada's Minister of Immigration is that a lot of the newcomers I meet derive immense value from the programming that you offer. A lot of people take a little bit of time after they arrive before they start to rely on sort of mainstream national media to consume their news. And the connection that I have to share news about immigration policy or the work of the federal government for a lot of newcomer communities is from local ethnic media outlets. And I just, being somebody who grew up my whole life in Nova Scotia, it's not something that I tuned into my entire life. But now so many of the people that I deal with just say how grateful they are for the work that you do to keep them apprised of what's going on, sometimes in their country of origin, but sometimes important news that happens in Canada. And I just want to pass on behalf of so many people that I've met since this appointment last fall, how grateful they are. And I as well am very grateful for the work that all of you do. I'm also really grateful for these two guys. You guys have a couple of rock stars sitting beside me right now. There's some things that they've done that have gained a bit of attention. I know your motion with Sikh Heritage Month, and here we are now. And Randeep with his private member's motion to create a permanent pathway for people who have a temporary status in Canada. These are people who actually do the work and have the paper trail to prove it. But a lot of the work that I don't think you see on a day-to-day basis is people going to bat for their constituents and people advocating for policy changes that are going to have a meaningful impact, whether it's on the parents and grandparents stream, whether it's on other family reunification models, whether it's on the advocacy to just grow our immigration ambition more generally. I really have a couple of very strong allies with our South Asian caucus members, but Suk and Randeep in particular have been absolute champions since the very moment that I met them, because we all sort of joined around the same time and got involved in politics together, and it's been really a privilege to learn from them about the importance of immigration when we were trying to get it off the ground in Atlantic Canada, and now to have their expertise to inform my work in this role is something that I'm very happy for. So look, I have a couple of thoughts that I want to leave with you guys. The first is that immigration is a major pillar of our economic growth strategy. I can't express to you how important it is, not just generally, but at this very particular moment in time. When I look at the challenges facing the economy, we're in completely new territory as we seek to bounce back from this pandemic recession. Canada's economic recovery to date has been amongst the very strongest of any country in the developed world. With G7 economies, we have the most extraordinary jobs recovery and rate of growth that's ever happened in my lifetime. We've got 115% of the jobs that were lost during the pandemic have now been recovered. Our GDP has exceeded pre-pandemic levels. Our unemployment rate, as of the jobs numbers that just came out about a week ago, are not just the lowest, is not just the lowest since the beginning of the pandemic, but the lowest since we started keeping track of those statistics in 1976. Literally the lowest unemployment rate on record. Notwithstanding that, if I look back to before the Omicron variant landed in communities across Canada, there was 965,000 job vacancies. We don't have the workers in Canada today to fill all of the jobs that are available. And if we don't fill the jobs that are available, the businesses that are not just supporting newcomers to Canada, but supporting people who've been here for 1 generation or 10 generations would be at risk as well. We need to embrace immigration if we're going to maximize our economic growth potential. Now, the great news is Canada is hands down winning the race for talent globally, but in my mind, we can win it by a wider margin. And the way we do that is embracing immigration. There's other things we should be doing in the economy as well to foster a culture of investment, to increase innovation in companies, but we can't grow the economy without the people to make our businesses succeed. But it's not just an economic issue that we need to be paying attention to when it comes to immigration. We are on we're staring down the barrel of a really frightening gun here, folks. The demographic trend that we've been witnessing over the course of the last half century in Canada is something that should concern all of us. I think back to, I don't think back, this is before my time, I look at the numbers back in the 1970s. We had 7 workers for every retiree in Canada. Today there's about 3. By the time I'm ready to retire, on our current trajectory, there's going to be 2. That's really frightening. It's not just the fact that we won't have the people to support the services that we depend on. Our needs are going to be greater because the population that we have now is aging. If we don't add more people, more workers, more families to the economy, we're going to be in real trouble when it comes to financing healthcare, when it comes to building the infrastructure that we need, when it comes to paying for the cost of education for our kids. These are things that everybody cares about. And one of the solutions that we're going to have to embrace if we want to continue to experience the kind of public services that we've come to depend upon is to bring more people into our communities. Now, I feel very fortunate, if I can steal a line that Minister McCollum used to use. The Minister of Immigration in Canada has a really unique problem, and that my biggest challenge is that I can't get people here quickly enough. When I talk to some of my counterparts around the world who deal with some really negative attitudes towards people who come from different countries, that's not something that I really have to worry about too much here. If somebody pitches one of those xenophobic comments towards me in a crowd, I don't have to say a word because the crowd goes after that person. And it's really, really a wonderful thing about Canada. I think part of it stems from the fact that, with the exception of Indigenous communities, every community in Canada came from somewhere else. My ancestors came here about 250 years ago after the Highland clearances in Scotland. They were persecuted and they didn't have a place to stay. They washed up on the shores of rural Nova Scotia, and the Frasers that landed there are my direct ancestors. I look over the course of our nation's history when it comes to our humanitarian tradition of welcoming Vietnamese boat people, of more recently Syrian refugees, Afghan refugees, and now Ukrainians who are coming on a temporary basis. I think this is a good thing for our communities. But one of the things that's been really heartwarming for me with all these humanitarian efforts, other newcomer populations have been amongst the most generous to welcome people who are fleeing these kind of humanitarian crises. And I think it's something we should all be very proud of. I do want to address one of the challenges that I'm facing right now. It's not lost on me that there's some really, really difficult times when it comes to people who are trying to come into Canada. Suk mentioned that we set a record last year for the most number of permanent residents that were ever settled. And when you look at the numbers across the system, our immigration system punches way above its weight for our country our size. But the experience of people who go through that system is immensely frustrating. One of the things that I've come into when I've been watching the impact of COVID-19 on our system is it's really battered the world of immigration in Canada. In fact, it's happened globally, but perhaps to a greater degree in Canada because our ambition is so high. There's 2 main ways that the pandemic has really caused frustrations in our immigration system. One, we've had local public health situations in different parts of the world shut down offices. And we don't necessarily have the same capacity to have everybody work from home on a laptop in other places around the world like we did in Ottawa. The other piece that's really challenging is we made a decision, it was the right thing to do at the time, to pivot our strategy towards welcoming more people who were already in Canada as temporary residents during the pandemic when our borders were closed, so we could resettle large numbers of people as permanent residents. But we didn't have an intake control on the number of people who were going to continue to apply because we wanted to continue to attract the best and brightest from around the world. But it's created a scenario where we now have a couple of years of applicants who are in the queue trying to come into Canada at a time when we are still scaling up year over year, but not in a position to overnight just completely double or triple our capacity. Now, the good news is, despite these challenges, I'm starting to see the internal numbers are showing that we're turning a really important corner here, whether it's on the resources we're putting towards temporary programs, or whether it's the actual people who are being processed under our permanent programs. So we've made a couple of big investments, and there's a few things that we can do to address these things that we're doing right now. But the things that we're seeing right now is that in the first few months of this calendar year, there's been more than 147,000 cases processed on the permanent residency side. We are in excess of our goal right now. We passed, before the end of March, 108,000 permanent residents who were landed with a landing inventory of about 100,000 more. And our goal for the entire year is 432,000. So things are actually starting to turn a bit of a corner here. There are still challenges, and we're working very hard to change them. And I wanted to give you a snapshot just on some of the very specific things that we've been doing. I think in my mind, there's really three things you can do to chip away at the really serious challenges that we're dealing with processing. The first is resources, the second is technology, the third is creating level spaces. On the resources side, I'm pleased to be working with Minister Freeland on this because she believes immigration drives the economy and is willing to put her money where her mouth is. We started by hiring more than 500 staff just to process more cases. And that's really the number one thing that's causing this uptick in the rate of processing that we've seen over the last number of months. These people have been on long enough that they're now trained and they're producing at a really high capacity. But we're not stopping with that first big batch of people that we've hired. In the economic and fiscal update, we had an investment of $85 million that's going to be making a big difference on work permits, study permits, temporary residency visas, proof of citizenship, and PR cards as well. In addition, in the recent federal budget, we saw another $385 million that's going to allow us to do some really cool things on the temporary residency visas. In particular, although that we do get funded to some degree each year to make sure we can keep the lights on, we've got a permanent funding model as a result of last week's budget that's going to ensure that we can actually hire people that we won't have to replace and retrain every year. This is going to have a long-term impact on our ability to make sure that we're not losing capacity every year when we inevitably don't know what's coming down the pipe the next budget. To have some certainty for several years ahead is really going to allow us to have a little more predictability and to boost our productivity. On the client service side, there's another $187 million to improve the ability for people who are going through the application process to get information, to talk to people. Now, we are dealing with such a high demand right now that it's not going to fix every problem overnight. Money's not the only thing you can do. Is not the only thing that we need. We got to make other changes too if we're going to make a permanent fix to Canada's immigration system. The second bucket that we need to address is we need to upgrade our technology. I look right now, honestly, my jaw hit the floor when I was appointed to this position, and I realized the extent to which Canada's system of immigration is still paper-based. We are doing everything we can to accelerate the transition to a modernized digital platform. There's a couple features that have already come online. We've got different lines of business where you can actually get, for family reunification, for example, as of February, you can actually go on and check out your case status with a permanent residency case tracker. We're going to be rolling that out along all the different lines of business that we have as soon as the tech is ready to go, but we didn't want to delay one just to wait for everything else to come online. We're going to, by this summer, have digital application capacity across 17 different lines of business in our immigration process. We're trying to look at every single aspect of it, and to the extent we can allow a person to access it on a laptop or their phone or at their office, it's going to not only make it a better user experience, it's going to reduce the capacity on the system. I look right now the calls that we get from MP offices and that came through MP's offices to the minister's office. In the past year, I think there was over 230,000 requests just coming from MPs. 80% of those are for status updates for people who are wondering where their application is. If we can put that information in the applicant's pocket, we're going to be able to reduce up to 80% of the calls that come into our system and free up those resources to process more cases. Everything's interconnected, and if we can continue to look at it in a holistic way and adopt the technological change that will empower people to get information about their cases, to navigate the process on their own, it's going to free up the resources we have to process people faster. The final chapter of things that we're working on right now is our immigration levels plan. I was absolutely thrilled a couple of months ago now to table what was the most ambitious immigration plan that was ever tabled in the House of Commons in Canada's history. This year, we're looking at increasing from 405,000 to 432,000 people to be resettled as permanent residents, growing up in the years ahead. My sense is we're going to continue to need to revise that to go upward and upward, because of the need that our economy has for more people to fill jobs and the appetite the communities have to welcome more people. As long as we have the processing capacity and our communities have the absorptive capacity to resettle people successfully, I'm not worried right now. I think immigration is a wonderful thing. I'll maybe leave you with a little anecdote from my own experience. And I've got a very different need for immigration in rural Nova Scotia than you guys have here in British Columbia. But I've seen it transform my community for the better. I grew up in a place that's notoriously and exceedingly friendly. I don't know that we were always as welcoming as we could have been. I look back to the controversies during my first campaign in 2015, and we had a local elementary school closed down, and we lost the mental health unit in our major regional hospital. A big part of why this was the case is we had a lot of young people leaving because there wasn't a lot of economic opportunity at the time in rural Nova Scotia. We made a decision as a region, the federal government was a part of it, provincial governments in Atlantic Canada were a part of it, and communities were a big part of it, to say immigration is going to help correct this demographic problem with our young people leaving, create more opportunities for folks. What we've seen since we've embraced immigration is not just that newcomers are coming to our community, but they've opened up new businesses that have created job opportunities for people. They've made our communities more dynamic places to live, offering new services in town. And we're seeing a lot of young families like mine who've moved back to the area to take part in a revival of the communities where we grew up in. And right now, the problems that we face are more similar to the ones in bigger cities across Canada. We're wondering if we can build houses quickly enough for all the people that are coming in. And I can tell you, as a local member of parliament, it is a much better problem to have to be worried about having to put houses up quickly enough because so many people are coming than losing schools and hospitals because so many people are leaving. I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to make a big difference to help communities, not just like mine, but communities like the one we're in now, to make sure that we do more and more to welcome newcomers into Canada. It's our honestly held belief as a government that this is a big part of the right path forward, and it's going to set up for success as we seek to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll leave my comments there and gladly hand it over to our moderator to take questions the crowd may have.
Thank you.
Okay, questions. The two names I have is Gurpreet Harjinder, Amarpal, Kuldeep Singh, Navjot, Balveer Kaur. Anybody else? Harjinder. Okay, we'll start with the first question, Gurpreet Sahota.
Honorable Minister, as you mentioned, we need a loss of immigration to fulfill our needs, especially our workers. And we know that living in the community, there are lots of people came here as a visitor or student permit. They want to work and they do work illegally. And it's under the table. Everybody knows it, but nobody wants to admit it. So why don't we provide work permits to the people who came visitor here for just a couple of months, like for seasonal jobs, like in forest industries, for planting trees, or in the farming industry for, let's say, month of summers from June to September. And also as well, the students can only work for 20 hours right now, but they are working more than that illegally. So why don't we do it 30 hours per month, or so 30 hours per week, or 40 hours per week when we know that it's happening?
Sure. Look, thanks for this question. And I think there's a lot more that we can be doing to help address the labor shortage with people who are here on a temporary status as well. And these are actually things that we're looking at right now. And we're trying to put together a package as quickly as we can to address the need of employers to tap into labor and talent that exists within our communities that currently doesn't have permission to work. The students piece is a particularly good example. There are some concerns I have about making permanent reforms to the program that might not be as effective in normal times as they are right now. I'm not as worried about these concerns when we've got such a dramatic labor shortage that we need to address. But I do want to make sure that the people who apply for study permits are coming for the primary purpose of studying. We do see when people come to study sometimes, most people who come to study have a wonderful experience, and it's a really extraordinary contribution they make to our communities. There is also a lot of people who take advantage of students who come here. Some of them have a practice in different parts of the world of telling students that, oh, if you get to Canada, you'll be able to get a letter of acceptance to an institution. Sometimes they're actually fraudulent, and they will leave a student believing they have the ability to work, but will actually be taken advantage of. And I want to make sure that we have protections in place to prevent that kind of abuse of students who come here with good intentions but are taken advantage of by others who sometimes charge a very hefty fee to do it. I think you raise a really important point. So we're looking right now at potentially increasing the number of hours that students can work to help alleviate this labor shortage. There's a lot of businesses in town that are just desperate for workers. Like, talk to a restaurant, talk to a hotel, go down Main Street of any town in Canada. They got help wanted signs in the window. But there's other things that we can be doing as well. I think we do have certain measures in place that are allowing visitors to work. It was a pandemic measure that has been extended. But I think on the seasonal piece in particular, there's some recent changes that were Minister Qualtrough announced with respect to the Temporary Foreign Workers Program that actually allows for certain sectors to have a much greater number of people can be coming in as temporary workers. But all of this only works, in my mind, is if we also create the pathway to permanent residency for people who are coming here. I don't really like the idea that we're just going to be pulling people and using them as labor when they could actually be making a meaningful long-term difference to our community. So I think, to take your question in a slightly different direction, on the one hand, I do think we need to make some changes to open up the ability of more people who are here temporarily to work. But I would also like to create a pathway to permanent residency. We shouldn't have this scenario where businesses are using a program that's designed to have temporary workers fill a permanent gap in the labor force. If we have permanent gaps in the labor force, we should have a permanent immigration program to help solve it. I think if we want to get all of my thoughts on this one, we need like an hour and a half to talk about it, which we don't have today. But perhaps if I stop by to do an interview sometime soon, we can dig in a little more deeply on this.
And second is LMI fraud. It's a huge. People made billions out of it. And any investigations or any future blockages so people can't abuse?
So I always struggle because you're never going to be able to have 100% success rate when you go after fraud. I used to do a little bit of bank fraud litigation before I got into politics when I was working as a lawyer, and every time there is a government that establishes a fix, there's a fraudster who's one step ahead of them. That said, there are investments we're making, not just on the fraud side, but also on the enforcement side for employers who don't treat temporary foreign workers effectively. And by making these investments to crack down on the bad actors in the system, we are going to be able to strengthen the integrity and give faith to everybody else who's participating fairly, that they're going to have a process that they can trust that won't be abused. I do personally think that we need to do more, but I also think one of the things that we could do is make the process easier for people who want to use it. That way the temptation won't be there for somebody to be the purchaser in a fraudulent transaction. One of the things that I'm really excited about is where this was part of the budget that was Minister Freeland tabled last week, is a trusted employer stream under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. When we establish that stream, we're going to be able to reduce a lot of the administrative burdens for employers that we know have a good history with the program, that we understand are not going to be taking advantage of it and treat their workers fairly. If we make it easier for employers to access the Temporary Foreign Workers Program and reduce the administrative burden on the LMIA, the temptation to be taking part in an inappropriate transaction won't be there if the legitimate transaction is actually easier to go through. So there's different things we can do both on the enforcement side. I think it's sort of a carrot and stick approach. We get the stick on the enforcement side, but the carrot to make it easier for people to participate in the ordinary pathway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harjinder Singh from Red FM.
Mr. First, I must congratulate you on your efforts of processing these applications, taking Ukrainian victims of war so quickly and processing their applications, I think 116,000. On the other hand, we want to know what is your strategy to clear the backlog of 1.8 million applications. They are still stuck. I was having an open line this morning. People were crying, people are hurting, who are waiting for their spouses, who are waiting for their families. It's really probably both the MPs will tell you or must be telling you that people are hurting. There should be a quick process to process those applications. What are you doing in order to kind of get rid of the backlog? 1.8 million is a lot of applications.
It is, and we are seeing the numbers are starting to come down, and I haven't seen the most recent update in terms of where the total number is here.
It was in February.
Yes, we've seen even since October there's tens of thousands of fewer people waiting, but at the same time we have more and more people applying. And one of the challenges is actually last year for the first time, Canada actually became the #1 destination of choice for workers around the world. When you ask them, where would you like to work if you had permission to? Last year and this year were the first 2 years that Canada was ever at the very top of the list. So even as we do more to process people more quickly, on the other side of the ledger, we do have more and more people applying, which makes it harder to play catch up. But I do have faith that we are starting to experience a significant improvement. Just before I get into the specific measures, and I hinted at them in my opening remarks, thank you for your comments on Ukraine. To see that Canadians have really stepped up to say we want to help, we want to do the right thing for the world, and we do have a stake in the outcome of this unjust war in Ukraine. There's people who are defending the values that we as Canadians hold dear around the ability of people to choose their own future and have a say in who represents them. That's really important stuff. And the impact of that conflict is not just a philosophical or ideological impact. It is a pocketbook issue for Canadians when you look at the fact that Ukraine supplies so much of the world's wheat, that Russia supplies so much of the world's energy. To need to respond to sanctions with sanctions to this aggressive behavior does have an impact on people. And to the extent that we can do the right thing to support Ukraine is actually going to do the right thing for Canadians, in my view, as well. So on your specific question, the measures that we're looking at depend on which specific line of business that you're looking at. I mentioned that we've hired 500 new staff. I've mentioned the different lines of business of the economic and fiscal update. Again, work permits, study permits, TRVs, proof of citizenship, PR cards. I mentioned the $385 million investment that I became aware of last week that we're now going to be able to deploy, that's mostly on the temporary program. So I said TRVs, it's also study permits and work permits. The $187 million to improve client service, so when people try to reach out to IRCC to call, they're going to be better able to get a person that they can speak with. So it really is a big part of this is resources. But the digitization, I can't tell you what a big difference that's going to make. I look at citizenship, right? And by the way, the impact of these collective measures, we're hoping to get the vast majority of our lines of business back to the pre-pandemic service standard this year. It's obviously you can't say exactly which date because sometimes events intervene and you adjust based on the volume of applications that come in. But we do start to see that the numbers are coming down and more people are getting processed. But the digitization piece is the long-term solution. The short-term solution, hire more people, put more resources into the system, great. I look at citizenship, for example. The last time I got an update, there was 60,000 people who'd completed every phase of the citizenship process except taking their oath of citizenship. The way that our law is structured in Canada requires you to go through a citizenship ceremony to take your oath. We haven't been holding large-scale in-person ceremonies for quite some time because of COVID-19. We've been doing Zoom meetings, and that's been good. We can hire more judges, and we're doing that to process more people in these Zoom meetings. But the capacity of our system only allows to have 75 people in one of these Zoom meetings at a time. One of the things that we're looking at right now, for those who would want to take this option, is to have a digital oath, where you can actually say, yes, this is the oath, I will agree to it, and then you can have a formal ceremony after the fact with a larger number of people, where we don't have to have everyone monitoring your box on the Zoom to make sure you said the oath correctly. If we do that, we can chip away at that. If tens of thousands of people want to do it, we could do that in a matter of days, not a matter of years. By embracing technology, we can make a meaningful difference. Now, for people who still want to have the formal ceremony, we will not deny them that opportunity. It is one of the most incredible things to take part in that I've done as a Minister of Immigration. But for people who say, you know what, I don't want this pandemic to interfere with my ability to have right of entry into my new country. I don't want it to interfere with my right to vote as a Canadian citizen. I don't think it's fair to deny them that opportunity when we have a digital solution staring us in the face. If you apply the same logic across every other line of business, and you realize people can get updates on their phone, so they don't have to call IRCC and then call their MP's office, who then calls my office, who then calls an IRCC location on the other side of the world, who digs a paper file out of the filing cabinet, looks at it, and calls everybody back on that chain to give them a simple update on their case. If they can log in on their phone, that could take 2 minutes instead of 2 months. These are the kinds of things that are going to result in permanent change. I feel like I'm taking too long on my answers. I
No,
want to give
sir.
more
No,
people.
it's interesting.
Perfectly
Yeah.
fine. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
Are
thank
you planning to eliminate or abolish the citizenship application fee?
That's in my mandate letter, so it's not been something in the recent federal budget. It's not happened already. It is something we plan to do. It was a campaign commitment. It's in my mandate letter, and it's something that we intend to do. Yes.
Amarpal.
Thank you, Minister. I have a question regarding the humanitarian basis. It's good, like we are accepting from the Ukraine, Syria, and other part of the world and Afghanistan. And I have a question, like why is the different policy for Sikhs and Hindu for accepting from the Afghanistan? They're coming from the private sponsorship, not from the Canadian government.
So, in what different policy are you
It's
asking?
for the Sikh and Hindu community, right? And they are coming here from the private sponsorship, not they are taking too long time, and they are like facing very hard time over there. But the government accept from the other communities, but not for the Hindu and Sikh community from the Afghanistan.
So, just to be absolutely clear, it's not true that they are not being accepted.
But they're coming from private sponsorship. My question is that.
Okay, so there's several different streams with our, this is specific to Afghanistan that you're talking about?
Yeah.
And look, we've been working very closely with the Memmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation as well to make good on his commitment before he sadly passed away a number of years ago to do what we can to resettle these people in Canada. And we have had people arrive now, and we will have more as well. So to understand the answer to your question, you have to understand the development of the Afghanistan refugee resettlement program. There's 3 streams under that program through which the government of Canada is helping resettle people into Canada. The first is people who've made a significant and enduring contribution to Canada's effort in Afghanistan, regardless of your racial, ethnic, or religious background. It's based on the contribution you've made, and we rely on our partners at the Department of National Defence and Global Affairs Canada to indicate to us who those people are. If you are Hindu or Sikh or any other a member of any other community, it has nothing to do with your eligibility under that stream. The second stream is for the extended families of previously resettled interpreters, and again, it's based on your connection to a person who served as an interpreter that made it here previously. The third is our humanitarian stream, which includes persecuted minorities, including religious minorities, and there is no question in my mind that people in these communities would qualify, and that's why we've made an effort to bring them in. So we don't typically make a decision. The minister doesn't typically. There are some exceptions, including in this circumstance, but typically speaking, the minister doesn't go and handpick who comes through a humanitarian refugee program. We usually rely on referral partners to indicate to us who, when we're dealing with government-assisted refugees, who are amongst the most vulnerable people here. So people would be eligible on the basis of religious persecution if they were a member of these communities. But one of the unique things that we're seeing with the Sikh community in particular is for those who've made it outside of Afghanistan and were in India, for example, if they had a durable solution, where they had a facilitative measure by the local government to say, you know what, we'll make room for you in this country, then you're no longer, you typically don't meet the international definition for a refugee, which means that you're less likely to get referred into the program by the UNHCR, for example. But through private sponsorship, we've made a decision to say, even though there might be a legalistic reason not to consider a person to be a refugee, we still know these people were vulnerable. There's a particular connection to Canada that we want to foster and want to make a pathway for people to be resettled. And we also had an organization that was saying, we want to privately sponsor them. Truth be told, I wish more and more people were privately sponsored. The outcomes that people have when I look at the data are much better for private sponsorship. And it's common sense. I mean, you're dealing with people who come and have a community supporting them, who've raised money to make sure that they're treated well when they arrive. But more than the financial piece, you've got neighbors who want to take care of you. when we've seen it in my own community, we've had some extraordinary success stories out of the Syrian initiative. You may have heard about Peace by Chocolate, the successful business. Their location started 30 seconds from the hospital where I was born, and the entire community rallied behind them. And I don't think without that community support they would do as well. And to see that they have the support of the Memmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation, to see that there's a community that's saying, we want you to come here, we want to support you when you arrive, that's actually going to, in my view, increase the likelihood of a positive outcome. So I hope that gives you some explanation as to how the different streams work and why you're more likely to see it in private sponsorship.
And I'll just add to that, when they applied in 2015, they actually, Memmeet Bhullar, a good friend of mine, they asked the previous Conservative government. They didn't answer their call. We got elected, they asked, and that's when the government-sponsored route, that's what they proposed. They asked, a privately sponsored route, that we want to privately sponsor them. There's 200 in total, 40 families from the Helmand province. We need to get those out, and immediately his predecessors started working on those. Unfortunately, due to COVID, they did, half of them got delayed, half of them in 2019 came. The other half have come either now or in the next couple of weeks are coming. That's
Thank you very much.
Before I go to the next question, I just want to warn the minister that our TV cameras are going to need some of your time at the end of this meeting for TV bites and clips, which is good for. Next is Kuldeep Singh.
Thanks for coming. Actually, I have the same question about Afghanistan. You said there are 3 criteria when we are bringing people from Afghanistan. Do we have those criteria same kind of when we got refugees from Syria or from recently Ukraine or another country? Whenever there is a chaos, that is the main problem. Why Sikhs have to sponsor, even it's not yet clear, why they have to sponsor those families when other people are coming here from other country, they are not being sponsored. They are you are accepting, our government is accepting them as refugees. Why not people from Afghanistan directly?
There are many people who are being who are government-assisted refugees from Afghanistan, and it's a mix in Syria. There was a mix of government-assisted and privately sponsored. In Afghanistan, there's a mix of government-assisted and privately sponsored. One of the reasons you might see a greater degree in Afghanistan of government-assisted refugees, and in fact, there are more in Afghanistan that are government-assisted compared to Syria. One of the reasons is the people who qualify on the basis of the fact that they served alongside the Canadian Armed Forces. There was a decision taken, it was before I was in this position, though I think it was the right thing to do, to say we can't count on a private sponsor to take the people who've served Canada, because when you privately sponsor a refugee, you, depending on which program you take them through, you get some say in who you bring. When we wanted to make sure that the people who worked as interpreters, for example, are resettled in Canada, we didn't want to leave that to chance for a private sponsorship, because we made a commitment to them on the basis of their service that we would resettle them. But in both Syria and Afghanistan, there was a mix of private sponsorship and government-assisted refugees. Ukraine is a different program altogether, and we had to invent a new program for unique circumstances. My first reaction when I learned the possibility of this massive exodus of people westward from Ukraine was to think about whether we could stand up a refugee resettlement program. But in order to deal with the kind of numbers that we were starting to see, it might have been a 5-year type program, and we didn't have that kind of time. But we also were dealing with a group of people who don't want to, by and large, move to Canada permanently. People who've left Syria and fled after the civil war broke out, people who've fled Afghanistan. It's very sad, but I met with a group of Afghan refugees yesterday in Halifax, and they know that they're not going to be able to go home. And it's heartbreaking. In Ukraine, they are very hopeful that when this war is over, they're going to be able to go home. In fact, some people are returning already, and that's a personal decision they're making. So it's not a typical refugee program, but the federal government is providing a much smaller amount of support to Ukrainians who are coming than people who are resettled as refugees permanently. We have it's a really unique and generous program for a new temporary protection model with 6 weeks of income support. There will be some charters, but a lot of people are paying their own way over. Some groups are informally sponsoring people to come over, but this is something that was invented over a course of weeks. It's not a pre-existing tool to deal with a conflict years after it happened. So there's different reasons that the programs look a bit differently, but they're each tailored to meet the unique needs of those specific programs. But on the Afghanistan versus Syria question, they are both a mix of private sponsorship and government-assisted programs.
Thank you.
Second one with that one. Is there any way that a lot of new arriving people, they're being robbed by the immigration consultant, just like you were saying, LMIA program or other program? Because if there is a fixed, just like government fees, that okay, you can take only that much, not more than that, that's easy for everybody to apply for LMIA or any other programs. Immigration consultants are robbing the new arrival up to $50,000 to get permanent here. Are you going to take any action about those ones?
So first, let's be careful not to paint all immigration consultants with the same brush. Some of them are very, very good, and there are some bad actors. But just to any immigration consultants watching, I want to be careful to say that they don't all meet that characterization. We did actually a few months ago establish the College for Immigration Consultants, which is going to be a self-regulating body that will be able to monitor the prevention. I'm a lawyer by trade, and we have a self-regulating body.
They're government-regulated body. We changed.
Sorry. My apologies. Sorry, I'm saying, but a professional regulating body to make sure that there is oversight that people are meeting a certain standard. That's only half the battle, though, because there are still issues with people who provide effectively similar services, but in another country, to people who are applying to come. And that's a much more difficult problem for us to address. The reason that it's more difficult is that we don't have the jurisdiction to regulate what a person in another country is able to say or do. So we have to use our ability to give reliable information to people whenever they apply. So our message, and we work with local authorities, we work with local offices around the world to say, you need to get information from the government of Canada if you're going to be able to rely on it. But we still do see people being taken advantage of. You see it with, you mentioned LMIAs. We do see some really heartbreaking stories with international students in particular, where people don't necessarily care about the well-being of the client as long as they can make money and disappear. It is, I do think that the college that we've established in Canada is going to allow us to better protect against that kind of abuse for people who practice in this space here. But we need to really continue to work with a local presence in countries around the world to give reliable information to people, because we don't have that hammer to come down in a strong way against someone outside of our jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Navjot Dhillon.
Minister, I have a question regarding students. I'm sure you're aware about the plight of the students, what happened in Quebec colleges, right? In 3 colleges. So some of the students who are already in Quebec, they got registered or admitted in some other colleges. But recently I visited India and I met lots of students who were having online classes, and they feel that they are in the dark and there is no communication with them. And it's a lot of mental and financial stress for them and for their families. Any update on that?
Sorry, students who were in online classes before they arrived in Canada?
Yes, they were having online classes just because of COVID. They were not given visas. So they were having online classes from India. But the students, those who were already here in Quebec, they have been registered in some other colleges. But the students who are already there in India and they haven't got visas, but they feel that they are just in dark and there's nothing for them.
Yeah, so it's a really challenging situation, and there's people who we've made special changes for to make sure that they could actually start study overseas because of the pandemic, and then be admitted to come to Canada for the study permit subsequently. When you have schools that actually shut down midway through the process, I think it requires a little bit of special consideration. The way that our program is set up, as you know, is you need your letter of acceptance, and then you get your study permit, and then it all comes together. So there's still work that we need to do. I think we'll have to maybe get you more specific follow-up to give you sort of next steps on this. But I didn't have this sort of front of mind when I came in here today. But it's the kind of thing where you look, if you've got an ounce of humanity, you feel for people who've been put through this horrible process, who don't know what's coming. But I don't have a specific answer for you on these unique cases today. But if you want to follow up, I'd be happy to provide a more fulsome answer maybe after the event today, if that's okay.
Sure. Another thing, the DLI numbers on the immigration website for the designated learning institutes.
Yeah.
That is the only thing the people who want to come as students, they just go to the immigration website, and they are satisfied that this particular college is there on the CIC website. And then they apply for that, and they get the admission, get the visas, or they don't get visas. But the thing is this, they don't have anything else. These colleges, the DLIs they are having, but most of the students now, when come to Canada, they complain that these are just the colleges being run from 2-3 rooms colleges, and these are just kind of money-making shops. Is the department taking any steps to stop these kind of shops, money-making shops? Plus, what is your department doing to prevent this kind of happenings, what happened in Quebec?
So I think now what's happening or what's my thinking are two different questions, because this is an issue that I became aware of after I became the Minister of Immigration.
Okay.
And it's not one that I, being from an area that doesn't have a lot of these sort of smaller private career colleges, this is something that what was a new issue for me even 6 months ago. I find it really offensive when these, I should be careful here, because there are some really, really good career colleges, and I really want to be careful, like with the immigration consultants, that we don't treat everyone the same. There are some fly-by-night operations who are taking advantage of people. You see the horrible treatment of people who are living with extraordinary mental health circumstances, who are threatening or committing self-harm, who are left destitute and have nowhere to turn. So in circumstances, my first priority is to support the people who've become vulnerable. We do have a program if a student becomes destitute as a result of their student or their study situation sort of falling apart, being left without supports, where they can transition to a work permit to support themselves. But we don't want to be using that, because we want to give the student the educational experience that they've had. I think we really need to crack down on the bad institutions. And again, sometimes it's not the institution, but it's the person who's helped them come in with a false letter of acceptance from another country. So there's different reasons where this comes up. But priority one for me is to make sure when we find somebody who's come here and who has followed the rules, who spent a lot of money, invested a lot of time and energy, that they, excuse me, that they're not left without support and the means to support themselves. But the second thing that I think we need to do is to make sure that we're reviewing on a consistent and constant basis the qualifications of our designated learning institutes. Look, there are going to be big institutions that have a long, successful history of treating international students well, that probably don't need the same level of rigor. But for some of the private career colleges that don't have a good track record, I think we need to start examining whether they might continue to have access to the program. This is just the kind of thing that's unacceptable. If you want to benefit from the really expensive fees that a lot of institutions charge international students, the very least that you should have to do on the other side of the equation is to treat people well when they get here. So I think it's the kind of thing where we need to be in a constant review mode to ensure that everyone's meeting the criteria. The different kinds of Options that I think of are, should we be doing regular audits of people? Should we have annual compliance that's stronger than what is currently required? Should we be reaching out more proactively to students who've been enrolled to make sure their experience is what they thought it was going to be? And still working on getting information to people in third countries to make sure that they're giving people accurate information. So these are all things that are a work in progress for me, but it hasn't led to sort of big change in the last couple of months. But it's the kind of thing, when I see these stories in the news, you just can't see it happening and ignore it. It's a very human thing when you see a person suffering to want to help. And international students give so much to us. I think the least that they deserve is to be coming to a system that they know will treat them fairly.
Mr. Taliban wants to add.
No, I think we should give maybe two more
We
questions. Yeah,
only have two more, okay, one question each.
Sure.
Balbir and Baljinder.
So I have similar question as the previous speakers they have asked. For past few years, there were a lot of people came from Syria and Afghanistan. Now a lot of people coming from Ukraine as well. So we know the situation, what's going on, and it's tough for those people too. My question is, people, they live here, they're on work permit, they're like non-peer status. They're living here and they're paying their taxes, CPP and all that. They're paying a lot of money to lawyers. Also, they're paying a lot of money to employers to get LMIs and work permit. But they're getting robbed, and their families are back home in India, and they can't even go back, or they can't sponsor their parents or their families. And my question is there any plan for those people? They can get PR?
Give me one moment, because there was a lot of elements of that question. So first, I see this as a distinct issue from the refugee resettlement. Refugee resettlement is based on supporting people who are fleeing because they're vulnerable. When you're looking at PR, it's typically based on a person's willingness and ability to make a contribution as they settle permanently in Canada, either for family reunification or for economic reasons. So to me, both really important issues, but I don't tie one to the other the way that your question did. So, you know what, there might be somebody sitting next to me who's better to answer this. I should give credit again to Randeep. This is something that we're pursuing right now, is to create a pathway to permanent residency that will allow people who are here on a temporary status a clearer line of sight as to what it's going to take them to become a permanent resident. Not everybody who comes here temporarily wants to be a permanent resident, and for a whole host of reasons, we don't have the capacity to resettle every single temporary resident as a permanent resident. I look at international students, for example, who are here temporarily. We had 346,000 study permits last year, and we settled a record-breaking 405,000 permanent residents. If we had them all become permanent residents, we would only be able to take students and no one else. And I think everyone appreciates that that's not a workable solution. But we are working right now as a result of some of the advocacy that we've had from people sitting at this table to actually establish this kind of a pathway to permanent residency. The second piece that is tied a little bit to the first part of the question, you mentioned about one of the consequences is not being able to sponsor their families to come. We are seeing that family reunification under the new immigration levels plan remains a really big priority for spousal reunification and with children. Obviously still a major component of the system. We are increasing the parents and grandparents stream from 23,500 to 32,000 over the next couple of years. But I'm also trying to understand how we can make additional changes to the super visa program, because right now, the parents and grandparents stream is the most challenging stream for me to meet the demands that we see coming from Canadian communities. We see right now about 10 times the number of applications come in than we have spaces for in our immigration levels plan. That's a really, really tough thing to overcome. I think that there's a real opportunity for people to say we can establish a long-term temporary but longer term stay through an improved version of the super visa program to actually allow some of those people who are currently temporary residents to transition to permanent residency and then to have access to improved family reunification streams as well. So it's not the kind of thing when you make all of these changes that happens immediately, but I do expect that we're going to be moving forward with some of these initiatives as soon as this year.
Thank you. The last question.
I have a similar question, but
Okay.
it's for the caregiver. So caregivers are waiting for their status result since 2019, 2020, and 21. Their work permits are expired and their health cards are also expired. So what should they do further for surviving? So why only caregiver program has no processing time limit?
So the long answer is we established a pilot program that said we were going to process 6,000 people last year, and the spaces went like this. And we met our goal. And now that we've got a pilot that's demonstrated enormous demand, we have to do some thinking on how we can transition that, learn lessons as to what's successful with it, how are people doing, to figure out what the long-term solution is going to be. It's always a challenging thing when you have a pilot that's really popular, because I'm thinking in the back of my head, that's a good sign that we could be doing it again or doing more of it. On the flip side, one of the challenges that I see is I'm also dealing with a pie I'm trying to grow every year to the extent that I can get more funding to grow and grow and grow the total number of people. But for every space that you have for somebody to be resettled as a PR, that's a space that has to come out of another stream until you're able to grow that pie and build out the processing capacity. And that because if you increase spaces without increasing processing capacity, you have longer backlogs, and that's not a consequence that anybody wants either. I'd point out though as well that it's the caregivers pilot is not the only way that caregivers can come to Canada under our different immigration streams. We have in Atlantic Canada the Atlantic Immigration Program. We have the provincial nominee programs that come in. We've had the caregiver pilot. We're also right now looking at different opportunities to make certain changes to the express entry system, and this I want to be careful not to promise something specific on caregivers on this until we have the details. But just one thing that I think is going to be really helpful with a change that we're pursuing with respect to express entry is the system's really good at bringing in people who are very qualified to do different jobs. It's not particularly good at identifying gaps in the Canadian economy and bringing people in to fill those gaps. So you might have two people that each have a PhD. One of them will be in a very in-demand sector. The other will be in a sector where there is no demand. They're treated equally under the express entry system. What I've seen through this pandemic, and it's really changed my own thinking, I get very offended when I hear people use high-skilled versus low-skilled. What we've seen over the course of this pandemic, a lot of those low-skilled people are essential workers, and our economy would collapse without them. I'm thinking healthcare providers, truckers. You all know as well as I do some of these groups. The changes, if we make the express entry system more flexible, will allow me or whoever succeeds me in this position to actually identify what are the key gaps in the Canadian economy that we need to fill. And we would have the ability to say, well, maybe it's going to be caregivers in British Columbia, maybe it's going to be truck drivers in Nova Scotia. And we would be able to say, okay, let's do a draw on truck drivers from Nova Scotia and caregivers from British Columbia. And if we have that flexibility, we're going to have a much more efficient immigration system because we'll actually be targeting the needs of the communities more effectively. So that's something that we're working on right now.
Yeah, because I'm sorry, I have a very small question also. Behalf of Hope Seva Society, my society working so hard for last few years, and we already signed one petition, and Mr. Surrey know that as well, and Mr. Sukhtaliwal. And right now we signed up another petition, E3955, supporting the Motion 44 bill, the one Mr. Surrey working on it. So a lot of people, undocumented people, always we have that issue we discussed with Mr. Surrey. Don't you think government should give them an open work permit so they can build their status here?
Yes, although my answer is a little bit more nuanced than that. I think there's things that we need to do to make it easier for people who are here, who've been working here, who have families here for a long time, to give them some certainty to allow them to take part in the legitimate economy, not the underground economy. We've had some real success with a pilot program we ran with construction sector in Toronto, and I think it's really showed us the potential to bring people out of the shadows who are making really positive contributions to their communities, not just in their work, not just in their family life, but volunteering at nonprofits, making a really, really important difference. We don't have a full picture of the scale of the number of people who are undocumented and making a contribution in Canada, and we've also got other people that we don't want to create a draw to bring people here who come in contrary to the rules, but developing the policy in the right way that will allow us to give access to legitimate access to our economy to people who've been accessing it in an illegitimate way, if that makes sense, in many instances for many years, is something that I think we should be pursuing. We have to do the policy work to make sure we get it right, to make sure we create the right pathways for people. Every time you dig in, you start to see 18 new issues about if you do it this way, you create more problems. If you do it that way, maybe you can make a positive difference. But to answer your question, the results of that pilot have showed me that there's real potential to do a lot of good, to give people legitimate status who've been here and who've been working, but are not officially documented.